Hi, this is Dan Potter with the Houston Education Research Consortium, or HERC for short, a research practice partnership between Rice University and 11 public school districts in and around the Houston area. Thank you for joining us as we discuss continuous enrollment across Texas and more specifically answer the question, what percentage of students are continuously enrolled in Texas and the Houston area? Now, in order to answer this question, we first need to define what we mean by continuous enrollment. Continuous enrollment is defined, beginning in the third grade, as a student who is in the same district during the October snapshot as they have been in for the previous 2 years. Then, starting in fourth grade, a student is defined as continuously enrolled if they are in the same district during the October snapshot as they've been in for the previous 3 years. The term, October snapshot, refers to enrollment data that schools and districts are required to submit to the state of Texas by the last Friday in October each school year. And these data are important for schools and districts because they are used to make determinations about funding, as well as identifying which students are eligible for accountability measures, among other things. But for our purposes, let's perhaps look for a more working definition of what we mean when we say continuously enrolled. And so, for our purposes, when we're thinking of continuous enrollment, we can think of in the third grade, a student is considered continuously enrolled if they are in the same district as they've been in for the previous 2 years. And then starting in the fourth grade and beyond, a student is considered continuously enrolled if they were in the same district for the past 3 years. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this definition of a continuous enrollment, which reflects the state's definition, is based on the district a student attends, not the campus. So it is possible for a student to be continuously enrolled, but also to have changed schools, as long as that school change stayed in the same district. So continuous enrollment does not mean a student didn't change schools. All right, now we know what we mean when we say continuous enrollment. Let's look at what continuous enrollment means for schools and districts. When students are continuously enrolled, it means that districts have access to those students for a period of time, improving the likelihood that effective and transformative policies and practices by the district will have a chance to work. Additionally, while there is nothing about continuous enrollment that prevents students from changing schools, we do see from the data that on average, continuously enrolled students typically attend fewer schools than non-continuously enrolled students. Fewer schools means fewer disruptions to students' learning. So we know what continuous enrollment means, we know what its potential implications are for learning, and so we could return to our original question. What percentage of students are continuously enrolled in Texas and the Houston area? The answer? More than 70% of students are continuously enrolled in Texas public schools. In other words, about 7 in 10 students in grades 3 through 12 in the state meet the criteria to be considered continuously enrolled. That percent is similar in the Houston area, as well as other urban areas around the state, as we'll see on the next slide. Now, while there were similarities in the overall percent of students who were continuously enrolled, differences in continuous enrollment were observed for certain student groups. Finally, across grades, continuous enrollment dipped at the end of elementary school, then again at the beginning of high school, before increasing steadily. All right, let's take a look at these findings in a little more detail. As mentioned on the last slide, the percent of students who were continuously enrolled was similar for the state of Texas as it was for the Houston area, as well as other urban areas in the state, specifically the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Austin area, and San Antonio area. In each of these locations, more than 70% of students in grades 3 through 12 qualified as continuously enrolled. Now, despite the similarity in continuous enrollment across the areas in the state, differences in the percent of students continuously enrolled was observed between certain student groups. And one group in particular was race ethnicity. For each race ethnic group, more than 60% of students were continuously enrolled. However, there were differences. Hispanic students had the highest percent classified as continuously enrolled, with around 75% of Hispanic students qualifying, while Black students had the lowest percent classified as continuously enrolled, with about 60%. This pattern was true for Texas and the Houston area. Additionally, continuous enrollment differed by immigrant status, with immigrant students having lower continuous enrollment than non-immigrant students. Specifically, around 60% of immigrant students were continuously enrolled compared to around 75% for non-immigrant students. Now, while we see these differences between race, ethnicity, and immigrant status, for other student groups, continuous enrollment did not differ that much. For example, continuous enrollment did not differ by English learner status or economic disadvantage status. Whether or not a student was EL or whether or not a student was economically disadvantaged, both groups had slightly more than 70% qualifying as continuously enrolled. And as we can see here in these graphs, this pattern was true for both the state overall as well as the Houston area. So continuous enrollment varied across some student groups, but not others. Finally, for this presentation, we can turn our attention to one more space where we saw differences in continuous enrollment, grade levels. Beginning in the third grade, the first time continuous enrollment can be determined, there is a dip, and the percent of continuously enrolled students starts to decline and continues to decline towards the end of elementary school. Then it begins to level off as kids enter middle school and even ticks up a little bit during those years, only to then be followed by a noticeable dip at the start of high school, followed by a final perceptible increase through the end of 12th grade. This pattern held in both Texas as well as the Houston area, pointing to how these classic moments in school transition tended to coincide with declines in continuous enrollment. All right, what are the implications? Well, first, patterns of continuous enrollment in the Houston area match closely with the patterns in the overall state. As a result, strategies developed in the Houston area may serve as a template for efforts around the wider state. And while differences in continuous enrollment were not found for some groups, there were differences in other groups, in particular differences by race, ethnicity, as well as by immigrant status. And these are differences that tended to reflect historical gaps in education. Finally, there were two notable dips in the percent of students who were continuously enrolled, one that took place at the end of elementary school and the other that took place at the beginning of high school, marking these traditional changes in student schooling as they transition from elementary to middle school and then middle to high school. The timing of these dips means that not only are middle and high schools oftentimes dealing with students that are new to the school, but also new to the district. These drops in continuous enrollment may therefore serve as additional indicators of the disruptiveness these traditional transitions have in students' education. So what are our next steps? Where do we go from here? Well, building on this descriptive information provided in this presentation, we will do more statistically rigorous analyses in order to explore what predicts the percent of students at a campus who are continuously enrolled and see if there are certain features of a school that predicted having more or less students who are continuously enrolled. Then we will look more closely at continuous enrollment in action, specifically examining if there is an association between the percent of students who are continuously enrolled at a school and that school's performance on state accountability assessments, in addition to looking at the implications of being continuously enrolled on individual students' learning. Be on the lookout for those additional analyses in the coming weeks and months. All right. That's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining our conversation on continuous enrollment. If you have questions about what you've seen or have feedback for us, please feel free to reach out to me, Dan Potter. My email address is below. And again, thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful day.